Well, greetings. Welcome to another edition of the Has Been podcast. I'm your resident Has Been host. We missed last week. Um, I don't have a good reason why. We just missed last week. Just trying to put it in a place. There were a lot of games and trying to space it where you could talk about the game and look ahead, but um, I, I didn't do it. So apologies for those that are following along, which is not a lot of you, but everyone matters. But time now to recap last week and look ahead this week because it's final exams at Purdue. So not a lot of activity going on until the weekend, and then get into winter break and uh, less games, and then Big Ten season resumes and all that kind of stuff. But it is Monday, December 15th, the middle of the month, a couple weeks less than 2 weeks away from Christmas and um, just over 2 weeks away from the brand new year of 2026. Going to start with volleyball because uh, their season ended on Saturday night at Pittsburgh, losing in 4 sets to the top-seeded Panthers in the regional final. But Dave Shondell made some news in his post-game press conference by announcing that he had signed a 4-year contract extension during the course of the season. Don't know the exact date. I wasn't in Pittsburgh to ask any questions, nor do I think any of the local media here did that to get more details about the timing of it and all that stuff. But that can get discussed and hashed out at another time. Um, but yeah, he announced that he signed a 4-year contract extension. And the question I always had with Dave and the volleyball program, if those have followed the program over the past year, um, because you got to go back a year to understand that two of the top players in the Big Ten and the country, Chloe Chicoine and Eva Hudson, decided to transfer out of Purdue. Chloe went to Louisville. Eva Hudson went to Kentucky, um, in part because they had lost some faith and confidence in Dave to match their goals as far as getting to the Final Four and advancing deeper in the NCAA tournament. And that I think that I know it threw Dave for a loop a little bit a year ago, where he did contemplate, retiring. He's 67 or 68. Been here more than 2 decades, has brought the program back to life and maintained the program at a high level where they are a challenger in the Big Ten, a challenger in the NCAA tournament. They recruit some of the better athletes and players in the country. Um, I mean, they are a force in volleyball, and they have been for a long time since since Dave started here. Dave has been good for Purdue, but Purdue has been good for Dave. Um, in getting this volleyball program to a national level. They haven't broken through and advanced to the Final Four. I believe Saturday was their fourth attempt in the regional finals, where they've gotten stopped, and they've gotten stopped by teams on their home court. They've played a higher seeded team on their home court, Pitt. It's the second time that they've run into Pitt in the regional final at Pitt. Um, in what 14, 15 years ago. Um, they ran in Texas on its home floor. I know that because I was there and I covered it. And then there was another time where they stopped. I think they got stopped in was it the COVID era? Um, but anyway, the program's in great shape and Dave has done a great job. But a year ago, I think he seriously thought about getting out because I think those decisions by those two players, and there was another player that left as well, that went to Minnesota. I think it hit him like a ton of bricks, and he was at a bit of a crossroads. He had to go replenish his roster. He had to find the right mix of players that wanted to be at Purdue, but also gave them the talent to still compete in the Big Ten and in their non-conference schedule. And he did that. He put together a team that really, when the season started, didn't have a lot of stars. It virtually had no stars because the two stars left, so he didn't really have anything um, as far as name recognition went on, on his team. Um, but through the course of the year, they they played well together. You know, they came together. They put together a really solid season, um, and finished tied for third in the Big Ten. And players like Kenneth Walter emerged as a star on the team. You had their set, Taylor Anderson, your setter was back, so that was a big part. And then you blended in some transfers and some other players that were still on the roster, and you brought in five freshmen that are part of it, and you brought in transfers that mix well. And I mean, I don't want to sit here and say they're a bunch of no names, but they were not familiar names. Maybe for those outside the Purdue volleyball community, and he really didn't know what to expect and what this team would accomplish or what it could be. And I think early on they had some struggles. They did beat. I remember them beating Tennessee down in Nashville in a showcase event, which was the first sign that they were on their way to a good season. But I think they came back to Purdue and struggled in their tournament. They played 3 straight days, and I think they struggled a little bit. And I think I was at one of the matches, and it looked like a team that was going to have trouble in the Big Ten, based on how they were playing at the time. But once they got in the Big Ten play, they really picked it up, and they held their own. They didn't beat Nebraska. Um, they struggled later in the year against Minnesota and Wisconsin, but they were taking care of business throughout the year, where they were as high as second in the league, and it looked like for a while they would finish second in the league by themselves. But I think losing to Minnesota and Wisconsin kind of brought them into the third place area where they finished tied with USC. But they beat Indiana twice, and Indiana's a program that has really remade itself as well. Um, but anyway, getting back to Dave and his contract extension, he even said it after the match on Saturday that it kind of, you know, gave him some extra juice to try to um, continue to do this. And he went to athletic director Mike Bobinski, and they worked out according to Dave. Now we haven't seen or I haven't seen the documents or, what the extension really entails, but they worked out a 4-year agreement. Dave said he signed it. So it's there, it's done. We don't know the particulars as far as salary increase, if there was any. And, he had in his old contract, he had a longevity bonus, which is a retention bonus that, depending on the name you want to call it. Matt Painter has one. Dave had a $50,000 retention bonus or longevity bonus that kicked in July 1st of 2024, and his old contract had one that was gonna kick in on July 1st of 2026. So, interested to see if those remain the same, if those kind of clauses in terms remain the same. But the bottom line, he's re-energized um, to continue to do this. So he'll according to his contract, he's probably going to be coaching into his 70s, which nowadays not that big a deal. I mean, he's still doing a good job. He should have, and I know he did get consideration for Big Ten Coach of the Year, and he did end up winning the AVCA Midwest Coach of the Year honor, which was he earned that one. Uh, but when you had Nebraska in your league and they were undefeated and appeared at the time on their way to a national title, it's hard to get past that. They had a first year coach, and she inherited a monster, and so he probably didn't have enough traction to win Big Ten Coach of the Year. But clearly, he got votes, and he did a tremendous job with this program. And I'm not saying the program was down in any way. I think he was down, but the program wasn't. And he filled in the pieces, which was something I think he was going to do anyway, because they needed to get a little bit more height at the net. And I think he was on his way to putting that together. And then the transfers hit him. And then I think he had to kind of take a step back and um, evaluate what he wanted to do. Would he have the energy to continue on? And as he got into the season, the joy of coaching this team, the joy of seeing them succeed, the joy of how they played. I thought they played very well together most of the year. Um, kind of, let him know that, he can continue to do this. And Purdue volleyball will be better off because he's going to stick around for a few more years to, maybe break through, maybe get that team that can push through the final eight and get to the final four. As I mentioned, he's been close. I think I think they can do it, but as proven that, if you look at the results of the NCAA tournament, it's better to be a number one seed because you get to host all the way through as long as you're still alive. But as we saw Sunday, being a number one seed's no guarantee. Nebraska, number one seed, was undefeated, got beat at home in five sets by Texas A&M, and then Texas got beat by Wisconsin on Sunday night, and they were playing at home and got beaten four sets. So it was kind of a split decision with the number one seeds. But the way the tournament is set up, the higher seeds, as long as you're in the number one seed, you keep winning, you play at home, and maybe that's the position Purdue needs to be in. But as we saw on Sunday, you don't necessarily need to be there. You just have to, have the right team with the right makeup to push through and knock off one of those top seeds. Maybe a different draw for them, a different path. They get that done this year, but they faced a really good Pitt team and a program that continues to excel at a high level. But anyway, it's good news for Purdue and good news for the volleyball community, that Dave Shondell is still going to be around for a few more years. His latest contract extension before this one was going to take him through the end of 2027. So if he doesn't ask for an extension, doesn't get an extension, then he would have 2 more years. And now, according to what he says, he should be good through 2029. But then I think you start now, if it hadn't already started, I think you start now to kind of think, okay, who's next for this program? You know, how will the university, how will the athletic department handle the transition from Dave to the next coach, whoever that is? And I think that's something that probably will be addressed behind the scenes as we get through the next few years to kind of figure out who takes this mantle from Dave and um, continues to play, continues to have this program compete and play at a high level. But that can wait for a little bit. But it has to be something that is talked about again behind the scenes as far as what's next for the program after Dave decides to hang it up. But anyway, volleyball had a great year based on all the circumstances that I laid out earlier. Um, and next year they'll be counted on to do the same thing. Not that they weren't counted on to do the same thing this year. I think they were internally, but I think externally, um, I think people thought they lost too much, which they did, um, and didn't know for sure what they would be able to do this season. But again, they had a great year, and Dave Shondell is good for Purdue. Purdue is good for Dave Shondell, and I think um, volleyball program is it's one of the shining lights of the athletic department right now. You got them and men's basketball. Um, that's about it, to be honest. Not much else is going on in the athletic department from a team success or standpoint, other than men's basketball, which was ranked number one, but now it's still in the top 10. They were number six last week. I haven't seen the rankings today to see where they're at. And then volleyball, which is, traditionally in the top 15 every year. But those are the two sports that are kind of carrying the weight right now from a national uh, perspective. A lot of the other programs just have not, ones that we would think about, women's basketball being one, just haven't, and they're in a kind of a national drought right now. I don't think they've been ranked for more than a decade, um, and they haven't been really relevant in the Big Ten the last few years. But anyway, volleyball and men's basketball have kind of been it. I know softball had a mini run in the Big Ten tournament last year, but we'll see if that's sustainable as they get into their next season. Moving on, men's basketball has rebounded nicely after the loss to Iowa State at Mackey Arena. Purdue bounced back and beat Minnesota after a methodical, mediocre first half, and then turned it on in the second half, and then you know beat beat a Marquette team that they should have beaten by 20, and but they were up by more than that until I think Marquette closed the game on a 12-0 run. Um, and so the final score should have been more than what it was, but they took care of business, and they were going to take care of business against Marquette because um, and it's not only because Shaka Smart is not taking transfers, um, but just the way that he's going to run his program. He hasn't taken a transfer, I think, in 4 years. Um, and you can be successful in that area, but if you're not successful, then people start to talk of why aren't you taking transfers? I mean, they lost some talent after last year that they needed to replenish, and they did by the numbers, but not by the talent. And they've got 10 freshmen, sophomores on their roster. Point is that the Purdue Marquette series has been a really good one, a good competitive series, high level, Big Ten, Big East, at Mackey Arena up in Milwaukee, wherever they've played. It's really been uh, must see games. It's been a great non-conference series for both teams, um, but I knew coming into this one it would not be like that. Uh, Marquette just did not have the experience and the horses to match up with this Purdue team. Now next year, I think they've got 2 more years on this, maybe. I think they did a 4-year deal when they announced it. It's still a good series for both programs, but um, if you were looking for it to be the way it was once these teams started playing each other, then you're probably a little disappointed in, I guess, the margin of victory for Purdue, or thought it would be a closer game, but it wasn't. And things will get a little bit closer next year and the year after that, assuming that they still play. But probably the most important game for Purdue last week was the game against Minnesota because it was a Big Ten game. They finished out the December part of their Big Ten schedule at 2-0, something that they've rarely done since the Big Ten started playing conference games in December. Purdue always lost most times they would lose the road game in December and put them not in a hole, but most years they were 1-1. But in a lot of those years, they still figured out a way to win the Big Ten, or at worst, you finished in the top four. So it hasn't derailed them in any way. Um, but for them to get 2-0 in the month of December, going to jump, you play a few more non-conference games. I think you played the one um, Saturday against Marquette. You got Auburn coming up, and then after Christmas it's Kent State, and then you're back into the Big Ten full time, either late December, early January. But um, there was probably a little um, um, hangover from the Iowa State game in that first game of the week against Minnesota. Purdue was average at best in that first half, and Minnesota was playing hard. They got a new coach. They're trying to, get things established. They'd come off a win over Indiana, so they had some juice and um, thinking that they could continue that against Purdue. But um, Purdue was up by a small margin at halftime, but then the second half it just kind of um, it got away from Minnesota, and I think Purdue scored 21 straight points, 29-2 run to open the second half, and game was over. Good night, everybody. Um, and that's they put them away that in that realm. I mean, they didn't. Minnesota couldn't match up with Purdue's bigs. Similar to Marquette, they couldn't match up with Oscar Clough and Trey Kaufman-Renn, and Clough had a big night, 9 for 9 shooting, um, 22 points, the most he scored at Purdue, and very physical. Bodies seem to be flying off of him, whether it's after a screen, after a rebound, after a shot. Um, he's extremely physical player, and that showed up in both games really. Minnesota didn't have the inside horses to stay with Purdue, um, and neither did Marquette. But Braden Smith was kind of the key to both games. I mean, while his teammates kind of um, wandered around the first half against Minnesota, he kept them he kept them in that game. Um, he kept them ahead. I don't think they were really in any danger of losing Minnesota, but you had a 2 or 3 point game at halftime, um, but without Braden Smith, Purdue likely would have been behind. But he did a little bit of everything in both games last week, and um, he's upped his defense, and he's very active with steals. He's very active with on the ball pressure. Um, you know, he's always been a well-rounded player, but I think he's moving to a different level with his hand just about in everything. If you look at the stat sheet from that game, he had points, rebounds, assists, steals, block. He had a couple blocks, I think. Um, so he just did about everything in that game. He kind of did the same thing against Marquette. So um, curious to see now as they get through Auburn and then they jump back into conference play where things will um, stand with them in that first half against um, Minnesota. In the first half alone, they don't deflections are not part of the official stat sheet, but every team keeps them. And I was told on the first half against the Minnesota game, Braden had 9 deflections. That's a lot. Yeah, no question. That's a lot. Um, so I think that's more of an indication how active you are defensively, how engaged you are defensively. I mean, there's a lot of signs there. You can watch it, you can watch and see how active they are. Um, but then when you get some numbers to back it up, and it's always good to have numbers that are not on the official stat sheet because that's something that you can present to people to say, listen, this is what he was doing. And he had nine deflections in the first half. I'd be curious to know how many he has for the season. And I don't know if Purdue would tell us that or not. But every team keeps him. But he would have to be one of the leaders in the Big Ten and one of the leaders in the country at deflections. Um, so, I think men's basketball is in good shape. They certainly um, got hammered by Iowa State and got hit pretty good by them with the way they shot the ball and the way they played defense. That I think it forced Purdue to kind of reset itself a little bit and trying to finish the non-conference season strong and get ready for Big Ten because it'll be here and there's going to be a lot of good games in Big Ten. I think Purdue's going to once they get back into it, they're going to play at Wisconsin. But I think they get a lot of their marquee games, you want to call them. The Michigan at home. Of course, they played Indiana twice. I think they get Illinois at home. So on paper, they would seem to have a bit of an advantage having these games at home, but it's going to be the way Michigan has played, um, the way Michigan State has played, um, the way Illinois has played at times. Um, this is going to be I think, a high level Big Ten season. I think your elite teams in the Big Ten are really going to be elite. You still got some really good teams that won't be elite that can are capable of pulling a surprise on any night. But I think the elite teams of the Big Ten are really gonna battle. They're really going to do battle with each other, and there's going to be a lot on the line when you get through the Big Ten season. Not only winning the Big Ten, but as you position yourself for seeding in the NCAA tournament, you position yourself to play as close to home as possible because that's how the format works. That's the way it is. And you've got Michigan, you got Michigan State, you got Purdue, all trying to get to a place where they can play closer to home. In Purdue's case, it's trying to start in St. Louis, go to Chicago, then the Final Four is in Indy. Michigan, I don't know the regional the first round setups that much other than St. Louis, but I assume it's a similar path. And them and Michigan State are fighting for the same areas. Chicago is kind of the regional area that all those Big Ten teams are trying to get to. Um, and that's why it's important to be the number one seed um, and be on that seed line as high as possible so you can get your pick of local area sites that you can go to and play as close to home as possible. That way your fans can see you. I mean, I think if Purdue was in the LA region, I think their fans would show up. So, um, but you just want to play closer to home because that's the way the tournament is set up, and that's the way they've done it. So it's really every game in the Big Ten is going to be super important because of the positioning you're trying to trying to get to. Um, so for the postseason, so it's be very very like again high level elite basketball coming up in the Big Ten between those on the top teams, and I think that also would carry over to the Big Ten tournament. Maybe not all the way, um, because the Big Ten tournament comes right before the NCAA tournament, and you're trying to you know you don't want to use up all your game in the Big Ten tournament and then not have nothing left for the NCAA tournament. It's always a challenge for these coaches and these teams of how they handle that. Uh, Teams that are desperate usually win the conference tournaments because they need to play well and they need to win some games and put themselves in a position just to make the NCAA tournament. Uh, but in this case, it could seeding could be on the line when they play the Big Ten tournament. Women's basketball, they're beating the teams they should. Um, they've been really good at home against lesser competition, um, and they've been not so good on the road. Actually, they've been other than one game or two games. Um, they got beat at Kentucky by 41. They got beat at Michigan by 48. They lost a game at Purdue Fort Wayne. They shouldn't have lost. And they blew a 16-point lead at Central Michigan. So you got the tale of two teams here. You got one that plays well at home against, again, lesser competition, and that's what they've done. They're beating teams by, they beat Lipscomb by 40 some last week. They beat Dayton by um, nearly 40 on Sunday. Um, Dayton didn't have its leading scorer. Um, so it's kind of hard to gauge exactly what we will see in the Big Ten. I think we have an idea what we'll see in the Big Ten from this team. If they could play as well at home against Big Ten teams that they're playing against their non-conference teams at home, then you you know they could make their way out of the basement of the Big Ten and get to near the middle of the pack. But that's just not realistic. because the competition they're going to play in the Big Ten is much tougher than playing Lipscomb and Dayton and some of the teams that they've played at home in the non-conference. They've been able to gain some confidence, they've been able to build some momentum here, but the team is who they are and who they are going to be. Um, and I think we've mentioned this before that one of the transfers they brought in, Taylor Feldman, is not playing right now. They still consider her day to day, but I think, as I've mentioned, I wouldn't expect to see her in the foreseeable future. She has a back issue that she's had since the summer, and she's just not playing at the level that she feels like she can play at. And therefore, um, they have not officially shut her down yet, but I think it's heading in that direction where they could potentially get, maybe a redshirt season out of her and bring her back next year. But a lot of that is still to be determined of um, what that's going to look like for her. And again, it's kind of hard to really tell what, we've seen enough of her to kind of understand the type of player that she was going to be for Purdue and how she was going to help. But, she didn't she was on a minutes restriction to start the year. She played 27 minutes in back-to-back games. So, there's an idea there, but it wasn't full go, and this is our point guard, and this is what it's going to be type of thing. So, they lost one player at the beginning of the year, and the first day of practice, Taylor Henderson suffered a lower leg injury, and she's been out for the year. So they're kind of down two players right now. Um, and the question is, do they have enough to get out of the basement in the Big Ten? And to me, the two games, and I'm not. There's really no need to look back on the two games they played in great detail. And they got one game coming up Sunday against Jackson State that they'll win by 30 or 40 points. But it's the two Big Ten games at home after Christmas that I think are the key games of their season. They played well at home again against lesser competition, but they played well at home. You get Illinois at home, which Illinois is not going to win the Big Ten this year. They're probably a middle of the road Big Ten right now, and that's not a negative because there's so many good teams in the Big Ten that if you're in eighth, ninth, or 10th place in the Big Ten, you're still an NCAA tournament team. And then you get Ohio State, which has flown under the radar a little bit. I think they're ranked now, um, but that's a team that's individually talented um, and beat Purdue by 52 points last year, which is a school record, by the way. Um, so, but Purdue, I mean, they need to win those two games. I mean, they really do need to win those two games. I guess at worst you split with those. But the way this team is played on the road, you'd have very little confidence that they're going to go on the road and beat a Big Ten team. And they go to Nebraska after the first year, which Nebraska is undefeated as of today. Very efficient offensively. Purdue has not been. Purdue has been okay defensively um, against lesser competition, but when they played Kentucky, when they played Michigan, they've gotten uh, ripped apart pretty good by those teams. And I think Nebraska is a very efficient offensive team. But they're going to go to Wisconsin in early January. And Wisconsin is kind of in the same group as Purdue, where you're at the bottom of the league. You were in the bottom of the league last year. You were part of four or five teams that were competing to make the tournament, make the Big Ten tournament, that is, make the Big Ten tournament. And and that's somebody Purdue needs to beat if they're going to make the Big Ten tournament this year. But if you somehow beat an Illinois or beat Ohio State, then your margin for error is okay. That if you don't win at Wisconsin, it's not the end of the world. If you don't beat Illinois and you don't beat Ohio State, then you go to Wisconsin and lose. You put yourself in a really bad position as far as trying to get out of the bottom of the Big Ten because they're not going to go win at USC and UCLA. Um, they're not going to go win at Maryland. I mean, I can go down the list. You know, they played now 8 road games in the Big Ten, and they're probably not going to win any of those 8 games right as of right now. Now, you beat an Illinois or Ohio State, and you get a little bit more confidence, and you go on the road. You know, Wisconsin has already beaten Michigan State at home, um, so they're defending their home court very well. So, what's more important for Purdue for this program? Continue its success at home or try to squeeze out some road wins? I would say winning home games is probably their most important thing right now. Not that you can control it, but you're in an environment you're comfortable with. You have some confidence when you play at home. And again, I think the Illinois Ohio State games are huge for them. And we'll talk about this, the next time we do this. But I think those 2 games kind of come down to what their season can eventually be. I mean, they're already behind the 8 ball from a record standpoint because you lost those 2 non-conference games on the road at Purdue Fort Wayne and at Central Michigan. As mentioned on another one of these brilliant podcasts that I do to the limited audience, that they needed to be 10-1 in the non-conference, and they can't be that now, um, because 10-1 would have put you in a position that if you could, you beat the teams in at your level in the Big Ten, the Northwestern, Penn State, Rutgers, Wisconsin. Um, if you beat those teams, you get 4 or 5 wins in the Big Ten, and you get to the end of the year and you're, around 500 overall record. You can sneak into one of these non-NCAA, tournaments. And to me, that was kind of there's 2 goals for this team. The main goal is to make the Big Ten tournament, number one. And the second goal was maybe to sneak into a non-NCAA postseason event. Um, and that would have shown signs that the program is moving forward, because the program has not moved forward enough, um, for a lot of people to um, to see the progress, to see progress at all. And that's why I think that Illinois and Ohio, those 2 games are massively important for this team to demonstrate that it is a different team. And they're different players than last year, but there's also some of the same things that we saw last year. The question is, can they score enough against a Big Ten team? Can they defend at a high level to keep a Big Ten team from running away from them at home? And this is all based on home games, really, because until they show that they can win on the road and be competitive on the road against Power Four teams, they were competitive against Purdue Fort Wayne, competitive against Central Michigan, but Purdue Fort Wayne and Central Michigan aren't in the Big Ten. They were not competitive at Kentucky. They were not competitive at Michigan. Um, so, who are they going to be once the Big Ten season resumes? And again, you've got to take care of those home games, um, in right after Christmas. And you don't like to say that if they go into that stretch that their season is headed towards what it was last year, but it would be hard not to make that judgment at that point. And a lot of it depends how the games go and how they stack up, how they compete. Um, there's some pieces there that I think um, can help Purdue, help the program, but you need a collective performance there from everybody um, to really push this thing out of a place where it's at right now, and that's the bottom of the Big Ten. And so we'll see what transpires with the women's program. They'll beat Jackson State, as I said, and then be off for Christmas, and then you know come out right after Christmas in a position to try to make some noise and and get things going uh, from that standpoint. All righty, not I don't think there's really much going on in the football world other than um, there was a couple assistant coach changes that I think we discussed the last time. There hasn't been much movement in that area. There's a few players announcing they'll be in the portal. Portal doesn't open until officially open until I think January 2nd. But I guess the biggest question in college football is, who's going to get the Michigan job now? If you're unfamiliar with what's happened at Michigan, their coach was fired for inappropriate relationship with a staffer, and and then he took the next step of going to this person's house, um, and he ends up in jail. So Michigan football is a bit of a mess right now. Who gets that job? It's hard to say. It's still an elite job. Um, is Michigan going to wait on the IU coach, Kurt Cignetti? Um, because in it, his revised contract, um, which happened after they gave him one with the Penn State job opening up, that if he makes the college football playoff, his buyout goes to zero. So are they waiting for that? He always do is win one game in the college football playoff. He just has to beat Alabama or Oklahoma, and then his buyout drops to zero. Um, I don't understand why IU allowed that to go into that contract. Um, because I mean, you could lose him for nothing, and and then what? I'm sure IU will do everything if it comes to that. And I have no idea if he's interested in Michigan, but it is the blue blood. It is a program that you would want to strive to coach at. Um, and he seems, he's done a great job at IU. I don't think you can dispute that. I mean, I didn't think in my lifetime, A, IU would be ranked number one in anything in football. B, they would win the Big Ten. Even though I was alive the last time they shared the Big Ten and played in the Rose Bowl. Um, and then have a Heisman Trophy winner at IU. I mean, I never thought those things were possible. Who would, who would, who would think those things were possible? So he's done a great job with that program, but I don't see him as long term there. But if he keeps getting contract extensions and he keeps making it difficult for team schools to come get him, then maybe he's there for life. I mean, eventually they come back down to earth a little bit, but he's also proven that what he does is sustainable at his other stops. Maybe they're not going to go undefeated every year. Maybe they're not going to be ranked number one every year, but they're still going to be in contention. And they're going to create a shadow over Purdue because of their success and Purdue's lack of success. And that more than anything is going to be hard for Purdue to fight through. In the past, IU was always at the same level as Purdue, or Purdue was a little bit higher than IU, and you had that going for the football program at Purdue. But now, IU has shot past them. They're a national player where Purdue's just trying to figure out a way to get to a bowl game, to figure out a way to win more than two games in a year. Um, and you'd wonder if you can do it at IU, why can't you do it at Purdue? Everything has to line up, everything has to be, right people, right day, everybody on the same bat channel and all that kind of stuff. And Purdue's had good success in football, not national success in football, but good success in football. But IU's having national success now, and I think that kind of hovers over Purdue a little bit. Because then you start comparing. It's not all apples to apples, but we start comparing and wonder why it can't happen here, or will it happen here? But Purdue football needs to start moving in that direction. It's only 1 year Barry Odom. You'll get year two next year, and um, we'll see what happens. But the Michigan job is the kind of the cream job right now, and uh, that's the story in college football outside of the playoff is what's Michigan going to do, um, and how quickly will they move? Um, it's all they got a bowl game and they have an interim coach, so none of that is going to play a factor. But um, it will be curious to see how who ends up at Michigan and who they take and who they want. And um, is it a Michigan man? Is it somebody from the NFL? Is it? Um, I think you'd have a hard time getting an existing college coach other than a Cignetti because of his contract situation. The Alabama coach who will never be welcome in Alabama, says he's not going anywhere. Um, so, because I believe he used to work at Indiana at one point. Um, so just something to keep an eye on and how that will shape the Big Ten down the road. All right. Well, I appreciate you stopping by and listening to all this. And hopefully we will do one more before Christmas and then see where things are at and then wrap it up at the end of the year heading into 2026. Anyway, thanks for stopping by and have a good day.